Hi, everyone. Welcome to our another episode of our webinar. So we do this bi-weekly, and our goal is to encourage fellow physicians and also other high net worth earners to invest in real assets and also basically document our journey. And we also learning at the same time. Just a little bit of myself. I'm Dr. Fasanya. I'm a pulmonary critical care physician. And now I own my own private practice. And this is possible mainly because of the real assets that I've invested in over time allow me to achieve passive income. And I'm investing as limited partner in 2015. And in 2019, we finally dabbled into buying our own properties. So I bought my first 8 units, and the next year I bought another 8 units. Then after a while, I'm like, I can't really get to where I'm trying to go by doing this. So I got a mentor. Then together we started the real estate syndication company, Dr. BDZ Capital. And since then, we've had over 1,800 units at this point, which I'm a co-GP on. And I also have multiple units where I actually do invest as limited partner too. Some of them are still coming, reaching that 5 years, and the asset value of 169 million right now. Really enjoying the journey. And this particular asset class is not really a whole asset class, but it's a subdivision within the real estate. I've always been curious, but I've done self-storage. I've done multifamily, which is our main thing. I've done both storage, warehouse, and offices. We also do oil and gas. We also did 2 funds in oil and gas and luxury senior living. So I diversified for most part, but I've never tried industrial in this way. So I'm very excited. And I give it to George, and then we'll introduce our guest, and then we'll get going.
Awesome. Yes, guys, welcome again. I'm Dr. George Ozoude. I'm an orthopedic surgeon based out of Houston, Texas. I also own my own practice. It's a direct cash pay practice that I started 3 years ago. I am a real asset syndicator as well. I started my journey while I was still employed in a large academic and community-based practice. And I realized the writing on the wall within the first 2 to 3 years that I didn't like the direction medicine was going. I felt there was a lot more that was available for us as far as financial freedom and autonomy as physicians. And so I started looking at real assets to invest in and started learning about the concepts of passive income and financial freedom. Started my journey as an LP as well in 2016, invested into assets like medical office building, surgery center, into multifamily, both residential and value add and development, filtered and spilled over into different assets, alternate assets like agriculture and mineral rights. And so I really appreciate the gamut, the broad spectrum of all these real assets. And now I have my own business, which is a real asset in and of itself. I became so passionate about it that I started a syndication company 3 years ago focused on financial freedom for other physicians because I knew they were feeling the same frictions that I was feeling, and autonomy was priority to them. Financial freedom was priority to them. And so since then, I've gone on to be a co-GP in over 800 doors and assets under management of about 75 million. So I'm really excited to keep this going, find new asset classes like the one we're going to learn about tonight, and continue to educate our physician community, the healthcare community, and high-income earners. So with that, I'll pass it to Bio for the introductions.
Okay, so we got 3 panels today, each one with different experience in the real estate space. And then so they're going to give us a little bit of discussion, and then we'll have some time for question and answers. Some people are even texting me questions before we started. So I'll say type it into the chat. And I think there's a lot of people today. So chat will be what works best for us. I'm going to start with Billy. I've known Billy for the past 2 years now. And then first, he lives about 2 hours away. He lives in Little Rock, and he's been trying to get me into the Little Rock space. We're still there. We've been analyzing deals together. Just nothing has really panned out yet. So I really know him in terms of his ability to dissect the deal. We also part of the kind of mastermind program together. Is it last year or 2 years ago? So we were there, part of the mastermind program. So he's the managing partner for Ridgecrest Capital Group LLC, and with over a decade of experience in real estate. He's a licensed realtor also since 2016. He owns his own 14 units, multifamily in Little Rock currently, and now is expanding his portfolio into the industrial outdoor storage and truck parking. And so I move on to Mike Bell. We had some conversations a few times, but we're still getting to know each other. But I like always the military guys, straight, shooting straight. And so Mike is a 20-year veteran of the U.S. Navy. He started his real estate investment career in 2014 with a living flip. And then over the next decade, we leveraged his VA home to buy and sell 4 personal homes in San Diego submarkets. Then he was able to amass significant capital and then shift into commercial real estate arena. So during that decade, he has honed his direct-to-seller strategy while wholesaling residential real estate and finding off-market commercial deals for larger investors. So while working on parking garage deals, Mark stumbled across industrial outdoor storage, which is probably going to be referring to iOS multiple times during this conversation. He recognized that iOS asset class was fragmented and in the early stage of consolidation. So he decided to act. So currently he owns 2 sites in Fort Worth, Texas, and consults for other iOS investors across the country. So he uses a combination of business to business and marketing strategies to generate off-market commercial deals. I definitely love what he has to say so far. Hopefully, we can all learn something from him. He showed me the numbers. Some of the numbers, I'm like, it's more along the car wash cash flow, very high. No, I'm loving it so far. So, and then I'll introduce Cedric. We actually met through other investor club before, and then when Mike and Billy was like, "Oh, you need to meet Cedric," and then we book one-on-one, and then I'm like, so it's funny. Cedric is also a veteran of the United States Navy, of the U.S. Navy, where he served 8 years active duty and 9 years. He received his MBA in finance from LaSalle University. He continues his service to the country by working for the Department of Defense as a contracting officer. Cedric has been investing in real estate since 2017, where he purchased his first investment property and then flipped that property for a 22% ROI. We can talk about that. Cedric is managing partner of Cobbs Creek Capital, where he raised capital to purchase multifamily and self-storage facilities in emerging markets in the US. He has a portfolio of 436 units, and is also host of the Service to Syndication podcast, where he interviews real estate investors who are serving in the U.S. military or have served in the U.S. military. So I actually like that you have your niche, the U.S. military. Good, man. Okay, let's go. I'll leave it up to you guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Bio. Thank you, George. Thank you, everybody, for being with us this evening. We'll hope to share this great opportunity with you folks, taking time in your evening to speak with us. Like I said, my name is Billy Miller. I'm here in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I've been looking at this asset type for probably about a couple of years now. Spoke with Mike about it, about another property I was working on, and he dropped some information on it. But that first information, there's just something within me that said I just need to look more into this. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized that, man, this is a phenomenal asset type, and there's a true need for it. And that's what we're going to dig into tonight: is what is it, why is there a need for it, and how we can help with the need. So I'm gonna pull up my pitch deck here. If you guys give me just a second. All right. So we've already introduced the team. So Mike's going to start first. He's going to give you an overview of iOS, what it is. Then I'm going to go next with the need for it, talking with a lot of associations like the American Truckers Association, some of the co-ops, and a lot of the drivers. And Sarah's going to wrap up as to why we're looking at the Arkansas market as well.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's a great honor. I'm here in the San Diego area. Weather's generally pretty good year round, so I'm happy about that, but can be a lot cheaper. So I would appreciate that if the prices have ever came down. But yeah, no, so let's talk iOS. I currently own 2 sites in the Dallas-Fort Worth market. A few years back, I was doing some work for a large commercial real estate investor named Kevin Buck. He owns a lot of mobile home parks, he moved into parking and parking garages, and he reached out for help to some folks on social media to help him find deals. And I said, hey, let me try. I'll try anything. I'll look at any deal to try to find something to hone my skill set to go direct to seller. Because at the end of the day, to me, real estate or outreach is a people business. That's what I did. And I ended up stumbling across iOS while I was looking for parking deals and parking garage deals. So I found it very interesting. And it had some of the same fundamentals that my mentor staked his claim on with mobile home parks 10, 15 years ago, a blue ocean strategy. You go where everybody's not, right? Or where folks are not paying attention to. So everybody's looking at multifamily, which I love dearly, but not a lot of folks were looking at iOS a few years back. And still, even to this day, not a lot of folks are paying attention to iOS. All right. And let's talk about that. What is iOS? Industrial outdoor storage. Essentially low coverage real estate, industrial real estate. Think large block of land, small building. All right. About 25 to 30% building coverage is about the ratio that you want to go for. Less or more just really depends on the site that you go to. Always zone industrial. Always has to be zone industrial. I would say that's a mandatory criteria for myself. A lot of the folks with deeper pockets may try to go and get a site that's not zone industrial to go through the entitlement process and get it down the line, but it'll take you a few years, a couple years maybe, and you may come up short because you're going to have to deal with a lot of different forces that we'll talk about later in the actual presentation. And these sites can store a plethora of different materials that you can see down there at from trucks to containers to piping, raw materials, anything you can think of that can be safely stored outside without being destroyed. iOS can store it. And you've seen these properties before driving along the interstate. You probably took a glance at it, was like, man, that looks dirty, and kept on driving, right? Those are actually very valuable properties, especially with today's political and real estate landscape. And we'll talk more about that. Next slide, please. And have you guys questions, please pop them in the chat. And Billy said, just watch the chat for me. Stop me when I need to answer a question, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Why iOS, right? Vital infill locations. Let's think back more in the 50s, 60s, 70s, right? When cities were really starting to develop and be built out, and they had all these industrial sites. Even earlier than that, they had all these areas zoned for industrial. And as time progressed and as cities changed and demographics changed, the use for some of these buildings or land started to fade away or started to change. So you saw high-rise buildings, office buildings, apartments being built, and these sites started to dwindle over time, right? We still need these locations, and so there's a lot of the companies around. Currently, it's a low supply, all right? And we'll talk more about that, why the supply is low in the next couple slides. Increasing demand. It's a huge demand for iOS because you have so many different types of businesses, companies, everyone is vying for the same type of land. Even municipalities, cities have to have land to park their fleets, to park their trucks, their service vehicles that maybe a major storm hits, like what hit on the East Coast recently. Cities have to have the strategically placed vehicles to get to their constituents to help them out, whether it's plowing snow or moving debris, whatever the case may be. Stable recurrent income. Because of the demand, you're always going to have a solid, and I say always, I say most likely going to have a solid tenant base to choose from if you buy the properties, if you buy with a specific criteria, which is what I lend myself to. Right now and this is per Green Street, this is per a lot of different large investment institutions. They're estimating a $200 billion market. It could be larger than that. I suspect this is the bottom floor number, just looking at it from what I've been seeing in the market. But $200 billion is significant, and it's mostly fragmented. Think about this. These types of companies or these types of land and properties are owned by mom and pop distribution centers. Let's think someone owns a piping or plumbing company. A lot of folks are at the baby boomer stage where they're getting ready to retire. They're looking to either sell the business. Now, a lot of folks in our generations, generation X, Y, and Z, would insert whichever generation after baby boomer. A lot of them don't want to go into a blue collar type of business. So a lot of these folks don't have people to turn or sell these businesses to. they put their kids through college with these businesses, and now the kids don't want to go. They're doctors or lawyers, which is great. That's you. They went on to be great individuals, but the businesses themselves or the land themselves, they fall off and they don't really have as many suitors per se, put it that way, until now. And it's supercharged by COVID. When everybody was at home, everybody ordered a lot of stuff, right? Amazon, you name it, insert whatever, 3PL. They needed some more space. They needed to get same-day delivery, same-day shipping. They need to get to the customer quicker, as quick as possible, because everything's a competition. That's when people started to notice, like, these sites are very valuable, more valuable than we thought. But overall, it's still an overlooked asset class. So when I say that, the companies that operate on these sites, they know how valuable it is, but they're not real estate folks. They're not really buying as much. But also, you have the large institutional investors, your Green Court partners, your Altera property groups, and you're going to learn more about them here shortly. But they saw the opportunity a few years ago, and they started partnering with large institutions, taking big money and trying to buy a lot of these types of properties. But to the general investing community, still an unknown. And I'm sure most of you on this call, this is the first time you've probably heard about this asset class or subset of the industrial asset class. And the cover land play, again, at the end of the day, you have infill real estate in a major market. If you're buying it, it could be a nice play for something to sell to a developer down the road. Just FYI. Next slide, please. Okay. And these are some of the per Green Street, which I get a lot of my information from them. They're a trusted source in the community. Some of the expected returns for infill IOS, and keyword infill IOS. It has to be infill. You can buy land outside the city limits all you want, and it can be industrial land, but infill is the key. That's what makes it desirable and valuable. Traditional industrial is sitting at 7.2%, and commercial real estate weighted average, they just lumped everything else together at 6.9%. But yeah, there's a story, it's iOS, a beautiful ugly duckling, because it's not sexy real estate at all. Next slide, please. All right, so let's start site criteria. This is something that's very near and dear to my heart. You cannot fall in love with these sites, or you can't get hung up on a site. If it doesn't meet your criteria, move to the next. That's what you have to do. Like I said, infill locations within major city limits, right? Major road access. For me, that less than 1.5 miles to the interstate, that's my rule of thumb. I've looked at a lot of iOS in the last few years. Went to a lot of sites, and I talked to a ton of truckers. Both of my sites right now are truck parking sites, and you talk to truckers and you start to learn and understand what their pain points are and what they like and what they don't like. And one of the things they have to have is something that's easily accessible to the interstate, number one. And number two, something that has great ingress and egress. That's important when you're driving a 75-foot machine and you're trying not to hit anything or damage the thing that you pay your bills with. So those things matter. And we'll talk about some other things that matter to them as well. Generally, I'm looking at sites 4 to 12 acres. I like 4 acres as a minimum, just looking at the yield and the type of rents that you could probably get depending on the area. But generally, 4 acres, I think, is a good number to start with. 12 acres, anything above that, really above 10, but 12, I like to reach above. You start competing with more of the big dogs. And even the big dogs, they're going down for the 8 acres and whatnot, but I like my chances being like Billy, Cedric, and I like our chances of being blue-collar individuals and folks who I can go eyeball to eyeball with someone's owned the business for 20, 30 years, because I've been in the Navy for 20 years. I can have a conversation. They may have been in the military. I like my chances versus somebody coming from New York City. Nothing against New York. I love New York. All right, just put it out there. But I like my chances to build relationships and try to get a transaction across the finish line going that direction. It has to be located within an industrial cluster. That's very important. I say that because, and you'll see, I have an example. I pulled up an area on one of my sites, but you want to be able to have multiple possible tenants in case you have turnover, depending on what you're using the site for. You just want to be in that area, because if all those guys are there, then likelihood is more people want to come, or those same people that are in the current area are going to want to maybe possibly expand to more space, and you could be a possible landlord to them. So you always want to buy, don't be an island. You want to buy in the general neighborhood, and mostly they should all be zoned for industrial anyway. All right, no funky parcel shapes. And I say that, I've seen some crazy shapes out there, and just over the years, properties get carved up for whatever different reasons. I've heard all types of stories between family feuds to you name it as to why a parcel looks like the letter M. I don't know. You can see a lot of crazy stuff. But again, you have to think about operation and moving around large vehicles, large equipment and materials and be able to store them. And also you have to think about resale value once you do put it back on the market. Most of the private equity firms I talk to, and I talk to a lot of them, they don't want anything that's shaped weird. Next one, physical security, and that lends itself to the point I was talking about with the truckers. That's another thing. The trucker industry you can have some seedy characters hanging around truckers, or they see as an easy target because they park their vehicles. If there's not lighting, fencing, electronic gate, security cameras, things of that nature, that's not going to make them feel comfortable to pay you a monthly fee or whatnot. And or depending on if you have a long-term lease in place with a trucking company, that may be something that they're looking for, or you can negotiate as far as TI or tenant improvements as well. Connected to local infrastructure, right? Water, sewer, power. Something you don't really think about, but it's important. There's a couple sites we looked at. They were old. They were built in the 50s. Didn't have a working toilet. They always had rented a porta potty. Things you don't think about. So then we had to go back and look at, okay, how much is it going to cost to dig a sewer line, add a toilet? How long is that going to take to get through the city, approved? Things of that nature. So you always have to think about those particular things. Environmental clearance. We were talking about industrial properties. It matters what happened on that site beforehand in the years before. We always get a clean phase one environmental survey. You have to. If the phase one doesn't come back clean, I'll move on. There are some folks who have the juice to go and get a phase two, but is the juice really worth the squeeze at that point, spending 100, 200K on the site for phase two to maybe or maybe not buy the site? All right, next slide, please. Okay, let's talk tenant types, right? This is why I love iOS. You got everything under the sun that could probably go there. From container storage, if you're closer to the ports like Georgia is in Houston, to equipment rental. Everyone knows there's equipment rental in every city in the United States because there's construction or work to be had in every city in the United States. Building materials, likewise, same as equipment rental. You got building materials everywhere. Chemical, truck parking, logistics. 90% of our goods moves via truck throughout the country. As they got the strike going on, it gets to us via ship, most of the stuff, but after that, it gets loaded on the truck and moves via truck. But then we have waste and environmental services as well. Again, things that we have all over the country. And those are just a few of the tenant types that I found that are pretty frequent, but there's plenty of others. I even have a dumpster rental company that rents dumpsters to contractors when they're doing renovations. This is the uses are endless, put it that way. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk about upward forces on demand. Why is iOS so popular? So I talked about trucking, right? There's a massive, and you're going to learn a little bit more about that from Billy later on, the massive truck parking shortage. So I won't touch it, but it's pretty significant. Geopolitical issues. What did we have happen yesterday? The ILA went on strike, the International Longshoremen's Association. Generally, the folks who work the ports on the East Coast and down there with Georgia's and Houston, those guys just went on strike because of automation, because of the wages that the shipping companies made over the last, 5 years, especially during COVID. They brought in a lot of money. ILA and the longshoremen didn't really get a lot of that. And then those guys were down on the ports, going to work every day, getting stuff to us. So they feel like they need to be compensated, but also they don't want to be replaced after the next 6-year contract as AI and all of these different technologies start to take more hold and become popular. If you look at the port in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, if you Google that or do your research on that, YouTube, you'll see that port is almost completely fully automated with things like that. So all that stuff matters, and it all affects iOS in a different way. COVID-19 exacerbated it, like I talked about earlier, the e-commerce surge, and then also reshoring. Because all the issues that we're having with coming up, I'm in the military. I've been in the military 20 years. We've been talking about war with China for the last, 7, 8 years and getting ready for that. We have in the Navy, I'm in the Navy, we have a strategic plan to be ready by 2027, because China has a plan to be ready for war ready by 2027. So that involves us moving things around. That involves a lot of companies moving things out of China as much as they can, and maybe moving it near shore or back onto US soil. So that's going to require, if you're talking about manufacturing, especially, or distribution or whatever the case may be, you're gonna need industrial space for that. And more than likely, you're gonna want to be infill or very close to your customers. So things to think about as we move forward in the world. Next slide, please. Okay, so downward forces. What's causing the constriction of supply? With nationwide housing shortage, multifamily. I don't know if you guys watch the debate. I'm agnostic when it comes to things like that, but I watch because it affects us. So I paid attention. They're talking about the number they kept throwing out was 3 million houses short, right? So there's a big housing shortage. Remember earlier I talked about highest and best use, infill land. So owning that land is going to be very valuable if you can get your hands on it, because down the road you may have a developer who may want to buy that from you. Talked about NIMBYs and anti-zoning regulations. So because industrial outdoor storage and industrial to almost probably to a greater extent, not the sexiest thing to look at looking out your window, right? So, and for those of you who don't know what NIMBYs are, it means not in my backyard. There's folks who don't want things in their neighborhood to be there. So they're just like, I don't want trucks, I don't want smog or anything else in my neighborhood. So you have a lot of folks who show up to zoning meetings and they don't care what the plan is. The answer is no. And that's what you have to deal with, and they vote. And so 9 times out of 10, I would say the public official is probably going to lean towards what the constituents are saying as well. All right. Then we talk about inflation, increased building costs. That also affects a lot of companies and how they store materials, right? They're starting to look at cheaper ways to store things. So maybe, especially when inflation was really rampant last year and up until now, they're looking at, okay, it's going to cost us how much to build a warehouse? Okay, we can store some of this outside. We can buy 5-6 acres and store some of this outside with a smaller warehouse that's fenced in, 24/7 security. That'll get the job done for a lot cheaper. So some of the things that kind of exacerbate, and also big box industrial. Everybody knows that we're building industrial like crazy. I live in San Diego. You're up there by the Inland Empire, about an hour north. Every time I go see my sister-in-law, I see the massive warehouse they've built. I've talked to the gentleman who's building the World Logistics Center up there in Moreno Valley. He's a billionaire gentleman. I've just reached out to him, talking to him cold. And yeah, he's talked about all the stuff they have going on, 2,600 acres of soon to be warehouses. So it's just a lot going on where you're eating up a lot of industrial land. That's what's killing the supply. Next slide, please. Okay. So what's our strategy? How are we going to get these sites? I clued you in on what my thought process is to taking out iOS sites. Acquire off-market deals. I'm an off-market guy. I was a wholesaler. Guerrilla warfare. That's what I know. I know the eyeball to eyeball, talking to people, calling people on the phone. I meet no strangers. That's the one thing my mama gave me that I'm thankful for to this day. Her personality. No strangers. So that helps us out with off-market, going direct to retiring business owners and landlords, like I talked about with the baby boomers earlier. Once we acquire these properties, we're looking at increasing revenue just like any other business. And we do that by installing and or retaining credit tenants. If you don't know, Billy here is a broker and he has a lot of contacts in the area. So as far as the Arkansas area, which Cedric will be talking about later, but we like to get them on net leases if possible to pass as many expenses on to the tenant as possible, especially when we're talking about well-established businesses. All right, obviously decreasing expenses, optimizing operations depending on what type of site we have. If it's a hybrid of net lease tenants and truck parking, which feeds into our adding value, right? So after owning truck parking for a while, which has been a great thing and also a learning experience because truckers are higher maintenance than what I thought. So the way I look at it, net lease tenants primarily, along with, if you have the space, juicing your cash flow with truckers, month-to-month truckers, which because there's a huge need for it, is a great way to bolster your bottom line, put it that way. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk barriers to entry. You don't want to do something that everybody can do. You don't really make money that way. You need to have something that not everybody can do or is very hard to get done. All right, so nationwide zoning hurdles. I talked about that a few times earlier. The zoning thing, you can't just build new iOS. And if you do, you gotta, I've seen it, but it doesn't happen often, put it that way. with everyone's or with the citizens' outlook on iOS or industrial in general. People just don't like it. It's an overlooked asset class, so people are not paying attention to it. So when you try to, and that goes into when you're trying to educate lenders and when you're trying to educate investors or raise money or anything, right? People just don't know about it. So generally you have some folks who are a little risk averse who don't want to touch it when it's all been there the whole time. And then we talk about most lenders aren't aware. We actually have a great lender that we come into contact with who they're willing to lend in some cases as non-recourse. So on iOS sites, which we like, we just got to find the sites. So that's what we're working on right now. High acquisition and CapEx costs. So again, when you're getting in there and doing your underwriting and due diligence, if you're doing it, you should be building in CapEx, acquisition costs. You should be building in cushion if you want to run these properly. Not everybody's going to do that. They might fall flat on their face if they don't. We don't intend to do that. We will build in cushion and reserves to make sure these sites are operated properly, or if we hit a rough patch, we will sustain. Next slide, please. All right, competition. I love competition. That was what really makes you test your mettle if you're good or not. So I look at it like this. We have four buckets of competition, right? You have your REITs, those folks who are looking for those steady, safe returns, right? You have your small and medium private equity firms, and I'll just group us in that category for now. You have your large PE shops backed by the big banks. And I use Altera Property Group out of Philadelphia over there by Cedric as a great example. If you look up Altera Property Group and JP Morgan Chase, they have a cumulative $1.4 billion partnership currently to buy solely iOS throughout the country. That's how serious it is right now. When JP Morgan Chase throws that type of money at something. Initially, it started off at 300 million. Then they started buying. It was like, this is looking pretty good. So they upped it to 700 million. Now, and that was the last year before that. And now, as of this year, they gave in just a whole nother 700 million for a total of $1.4 billion of promised capital to buy iOS. That's how big the market is right now for this type of asset class. And remember, I said the market floor is about $200 billion. They have 1.4 billion added into it. So just looking at it like that. End users, all right? So you still have companies who need to operate, and depending on the city that they're operating in and what their operations are, what they're trying to accomplish, it may be more feasible for them to purchase a site, vice rent from, or lease from an actual landlord. The site we own in Fort Worth, we had a trucking company, we had a few companies come to us, but we had a trucking company most recently come to us, kicking the tires, just trying to play with numbers and give us an offer, which we ended up ultimately declining. But it's real world, everyday things that are happening where you have between end users, PE shops, and everybody in between who are vying for different types of properties. Next slide, please. All right. So acquisition strategy. Again, we do everything. I like to do things off market. Billy, he's holding down the broker side, so he's bringing us deals that may be marketed, pocket listings. I'm doing what I did with houses. Go straight direct to seller and do it like that. But we're also looking at businesses though. So there may be a business operating where they own the actual real estate. And like I said, maybe someone near retirement. I just have to find those people, but we can look at folks who may not be near retirement via sell leaseback. Maybe you have a business owner who's 45, 50 years old, not looking to retire anytime soon. They want to expand. So they may need a cash infusion. So depending on the numbers, we may be able to work something out with a sell leaseback play. Direct interaction, like I said, retiring and landlords and business owners. And then also leveraging like Billy, broker, lender, and vendor relationships to uncover hidden gems. And that's just by doing folks favors. I'm a favor guy. So when I talk to people on the phone, it's not just transactional. I'm trying to find out what you need, what you got going on. I may have to start using the AI stuff like Adebayo has going on to start remembering notes because I'm a notepad type of guy. But that stuff really, it works. It matters, especially when you're dealing with people who are making their money based on transactions. You have to do favors for them to bring things to you. Next slide. All right, risk and mitigations. I've been in the military a long time. All right, everything has risk, and we deal with risk in the military with mitigation. We mitigate risk. All right, so we look at vacancy, right? That's a real risk. So how do we mitigate? We do our market research. We do our research ahead of time and during due diligence per each property we come across. I'm looking for what is going to be my blind spots, what's going to be something that could sink us if we didn't do or shore that up properly. So that has to be drawn out. You got to do that risk analysis. Business development and broker relationships. So like I mentioned earlier in the previous slide, building those relationships. I've had people call me and say, hey, I got this. I have the number to Penske Logistics right here. Her name is Tammy Gaines. Tammy called me in December of last year, and she just called me back again. So she's looking for 12 trucks, 12 spaces for trucks. I shot her a couple emails over time, right? Just to keep that lead a little warm. But that stuff matters, and building relationships matter. And even if you don't meet the people face to face, just having that non-transactional attitude towards things matter. Market volatility, right? So things are going to happen. The world's going to happen. So you need to, like I said, we only install good tenants, retain the right credit tenants at market rates via net leases, if possible. And you're gonna inherit tenants. Hopefully, you can get them on a net lease if they're not there. And then only lease space to short-term tenants as a value add component. So I know Adebayo, that's something that we talked about during our first meeting. Something that my partner Ron Rody and I, in a couple of our deals, we talk about that. We need to make sure as we buy more deals, we're going to look at longer term tenants and pepper as needed or as possible with short term truckers. So that way we're not at the mercy or the whim of any type of trucking recession, because I look at truckers like the canaries in the coal mine to let you know when trouble's on the way, because they start to see their rates start to get tighter. And they start to, hey man, I know you want to raise rates, but I can't pay this because our rates are dropping on this side. I hear those things all the time. So that's something that kind of gives me pause. And as I move forward in my investing career, I'm looking at long-term tenants, supplemented with short-term tenants to help bolster the bottom line. So it's pretty simple for me. Looking at maintenance and infrastructure, strong due diligence, like I said before, making sure we know what we're buying, a budget. I talked about that before as well. Making sure we're planning ahead to make sure we're not like coming across, or you're going to come across surprises, but we want to make sure we have something built in just in case. Maintenance plan, depending on what type of property you're buying, and net lease. Obviously, if you hadn't realized, I'm a big fan of net leases. All right, you've seen that as a theme throughout the presentation. Talk about liability. Got to have insurance. No ifs, ands, or buts. I've seen some folks operate in some, I don't even know why or how they would do it, but for example, and this is not in the liability piece, but in zoning, I've seen a man in Dallas, in South Dallas. He built 12 acres. He developed 12 acres he owned of farmland, was not industrially zoned. He developed it on his own because he had a business. I think he had a heavy equipment business, made it into truck parking, was running it for 6 months. The city found out, realized it wasn't zoned properly, shut him down. Then he goes to try to go through the trouble getting it zoned. Come to find out, it's located by a large big tire hill. And I know we got some folks in Dallas, but there's a big tire hill in South Dallas, or it was like a tire mountain or something like that. There's a site that's very close to that where they can't zone that site for industrial. He can never get across the finish line. So you see a lot of interesting things. So I want to make sure we always mitigate and we always look at different risks and we do things the right way and properly. Safety protocols, that's important. Signage to minimize accident risk. We put up signs as necessary just to say we did it. All right, Dave, good to see you again, man. I didn't see you, but great to know you were on the call. Me and Dave met a couple years back at the Best Ever Conference, and it was good to see him. Yeah, next slide, please. All right, so this is a site I own in Fort Worth area. So it's 5.5 acres. It was 6,000 square foot warehouse, and there's a 1,500 square foot workshop that we have on site. It's nothing sexy. It's just a building. It's industrial. The main thing we use it right now for is truck parking. We're looking for a tenant. We have it for lease right now. And we looked at different options. And this is why I like iOS, because for the site, we talked about bifurcating the land. And so renting out, and we have 2 entrances, which you can't see there, but renting out 2 acres and the building to a company, fencing off and cutting the parcel in half. So we do a replat, and then leasing the other 3 acres and keeping it as truck parking. So we have options depending on who comes across the table with a deal or with a proposal, and we can still see how we want to do, or just lease out the entire site as well. Lighting, fenced and gated, cameras, gravel and dirt, all that great stuff. And then when I talk about site criteria, right? So that's why I wanted to put this picture up here. So if you look at the photo on the right, it looks, if you look at the top of the photo, that's the 820, a major interstate. And then you have Beach Street going down right there. That's about a mile to a mile and a half away from the interstate. But also you have Dillard's Distribution Center. You have Tyson Foods plant that we're like directly across the railroad tracks from. And that railroad tracks goes to a major rail terminal, Waste Connections, and you have a few other larger warehouses as well. And what doesn't show on this aerial, because it's so brand new, we have a Class A warehouse directly to the right, and right below the Tyson's food warehouse is a Class A warehouse that was just built. And I think Ryder Logistics, if I'm not mistaken, just leased it out. But it's about 100,000 square foot warehouse that's built behind us. So again, buying in the right location matters. And also we have KPS Global right across the street as well, which is a large warehouse as well. But yeah, we just have a small 5.5 acres that can be used for anything or developed out later on down the road. Next slide, please. And that's all I have. I'm gonna turn it over to Billy and I'll watch in the chat. Appreciate y'all for the time.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Okay, so I'm going to talk about, is there really a need for iOS in truck parking? Statistically speaking, and this is from, these stats are from the American Truckers Association and the Department of Transportation. So the American trucking industry employs 7.9 million Americans. Most of us don't know it, but you could probably have 3, 4, 5 neighbors who drive trucks. It may not be full-time, maybe part-time, but there's a lot of truckers on the road. And if we think about it, when Mike mentioned earlier, e-commerce, construction, just big booming in the US, 71% of our domestic freight is moved through the country through truck drivers. Now that's just domestic. We also have international comes through maybe Mexico or Canada or wherever else, but that's a huge amount of what we get. So when you order something from Amazon, it's coming through trucks. If you order something from Walmart, it's coming from trucks. And like I said, if it's coming off the docks, then it's also coming through trucks. So also speaking, there's currently one safe legal truck parking space for every 11 trucks. So they're basically playing duck, duck, goose whenever they're going to say like a pilot. If they hit a certain time of the day, like high noon, pilot is full. And so now there's no parking. They have to drive around, or they have to park on an on-ramp or off-ramp, which is super dangerous because people coming on and off. Also, access to truck parking routinely appears in the American Transportation Research Institute's annual list of top issues, or ATRI. So it's number 3 overall in 2022 among respondents, and number 1 upon truck drivers. So it's a huge concern for truck drivers. They really need it. Just like Mike says, we talk to truck drivers all the time. And when we say we're looking at investing in truck parking, their eyes light up. It's okay, we need this. So let me recommend you. They feed us information all the time. We talk to them about what they need and what they want. And so it's a huge priority for them because they also have families. They also have mental health and all sorts of things they deal with as well. So they're not just delivering, but they may be away from their family a week. Some may be away for 3 or 4 days. And so being on the road, they have a safe place to park. They can lay down, rest, and get up and hit the road again without consistently going and going and going. And here's this is a snippet from a recent letter written by the American Truckers Association to the U.S. Department of Transportation. So 1, the scarcity of truck parking spaces across the country decreases safety for all highway users. One of those things that, like I said, when they have to park on an on-ramp or off-ramp, it causes a lot of major accidents. Matter of fact, there was one not too long ago reported where a bus ran into a tractor-trailer because it parked on the side of the road. Number 2, it exacerbates the industry's long-standing workforce challenges. A lot of truck drivers, they've gotten so frustrated, they just don't want to deal with the hassles because having to find parking spaces, having to get on the roads a long amount of time. There's a lot that truck drivers deal with, and truck parking is one of those things because if they can't park, then they have to keep going and get penalized. Some companies are so very strict that when you hit your hours, you have to park, and they don't care where you're at. So if you think about if you've ever been on a trip driving and you just see trucks on the side of the road, that means their time is out. And they have to stay right there until that time restarts back over again. And so a lot of the guys are like, you know what, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. And so now there's a lot less truck drivers than there ever has been before. Number three, it contributes negatively to driver health and well-being, diminishes truck productivity, and also it results in unnecessary greenhouse emissions. One of the things that a truck does, especially if they're driving in wintertime, they have what's called an APU, or auxiliary power unit. And so they have to keep that power unit running. And as long as it's running, it's putting out those green gas house emissions. And so that's another issue that happened with truck drivers right now as well, is because if they don't have that spot, if they're in the middle of nowhere, they have to run that APU. Next, we're going to talk about why Arkansas. So greater than 40% of daily traffic on Arkansas highways are trucks. As you can see by this map here, major highways going to Arkansas is Interstate 40. We know that goes all the way across the U.S. But looking at some of the map here, and also 30. 30 runs from Little Rock straight to Dallas as well. And so right here where it says truck volume at count location, 20,000 or more, then you look at the truck percent of daily traffic, greater than 40%. There's a lot of truck traffic that goes through Little Rock. And Cedric's going to touch on that here in a little bit as well as to why, and plus with the number of jobs increasing, people moving to Arkansas as well. And although we have a lot of truck traffic, the truck parking capacity is lower than the amount of truck traffic. So here we have also a graphic from, and this is from RDOT, which is Arkansas Department of Transportation. The number of spaces, the smallest spaces, 5 to 20 to 50, 100 to 300. The circles are based on the parking capacity, and then the colors show you the percentage of capacity. And so right now we have a lot of truck traffic based on the other slide, but we have a lot less capacity for trucks to park. And so Cedric, he's going to talk about why Arkansas as well, with the growing e-commerce, growing businesses, et cetera, in Arkansas as well. Turn it over to Cedric.
All right. Thanks, Billy. So on the next few slides, the information that I will be providing you has come from sources, the Arkansas Governor's website, Little Rock Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Arkansas Economic Development Commission. So why Arkansas? Why are we looking in Arkansas? Little Rock MSA reached a peak employment milestone in June of this year, and the region reported 370,420 employed individuals, up 12,856 from the year prior. West Rock Coffee opened a state-of-the-art facility in Conway and will be adding another 1,000 jobs. Elopac broke ground on their new facility as part of a $70 million investment, which again will create 150 new jobs. Elopac is a paper shipping materials company. Dassault Falcon Jet announced a $100 million expansion, which will be adding 800 new jobs. And Dassault, they are a luxury private jet manufacturing company. Trex has a new production site at the port of Little Rock, and it'll be adding another 500 jobs. Trex is a composite material building manufacturing company, and you guys may know that by some of your decking material. If you have decks on the rear of your homes, that type of composite material Trex manufactures. Next slide, please. Again, why Arkansas's unemployment rate declined to 3.3% in June of this year, while the national unemployment rate increased to 4.1%. Arkansas's personal income tax rate is 3.9%, and of the other southern states that levy an income tax, it has the lowest income tax rate. Credit rating agency Standard & Poor's just upgraded the state's outlook from stable to positive based on Arkansas's strong economy. And Arkansas named the nation's #2 most affordable state to live in. And United Van Lines named Arkansas the #4 inbound state for movers. And for those of you who are familiar, United Van Lines is one of the nation's leading moving companies. Next slide, please. All right. Again, why Arkansas is #1 producer of rice in the nation. Arkansas is the #2 producer of poultry and eggs in the nation. As you guys may or may not know, Tyson Foods, which is one of the nation's leading producers, is headquartered in Springdale. Arkansas is the #3 producer of catfish in the nation. Trust and believe me, every time I come to Arkansas, that's the main thing that I want to eat is catfish. I was born and raised in Arkansas, so that's definitely something I look forward to when I come down. Arkansas is the #3 producer of food grains in the nation. And Arkansas is the #4 producer of lumber in the nation. Next slide, please. As many of you may or may not know, Arkansas is the home of the world's leading retailer, Walmart. It's also home to 2 of the Fortune 1000 transportation companies, J.B. Hunt and Art Best. And it's home to 150 aerospace and defense companies. And Arkansas is one of the nation's leading distribution and logistics hubs. And it's mainly due to its central location in the country. So with these points and everything you've heard tonight are the reasons we have chosen to focus in this market and in this specific asset class. Next slide, which I think that's it for us.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure we made a clarification on one thing. So with the truck parking, right? So that's how I became familiar with the iOS space. So I own truck parking, operated currently, but as I buy more, I want to make sure I'm shifting towards longer term tenants because it's just less labor intensive, less phone calls. So my partner Ron and I in Dallas, we leverage his law firm. We use his VAs who speak mainly Spanish. 70% of our tenants are Spanish speaking, but it's very labor intensive. We get calls all the time for different reasons. Someone's parked in my spot, you name it. So not necessarily after I owned it for a while, that's not something I really want to do moving forward. I want to be able to have net lease tenants, get the sites, move on to the next, and just manage ad hoc, but not having to be a weekly or daily occurrence that we have to manage personnel on a regular basis. We have to manage. You see what I'm saying? So we're looking for more of a not hands-off investment, but we're looking for more of a less labor-intensive investment. So that's why I always hit on net lease primarily. And then if you have the extra space, you got the infrastructure, you got a couple acres, you can throw in some monthly parkers as well, because that's what's really going to help you boost that bottom line. But we're going to always underwrite for the net lease tenant primarily and make the deal work. That is the formula moving forward, if that makes sense.
So I have a question about that then. Are the numbers that you showed for the returns based on the underwriting just for the net leases, or is it considering?
Correct. Just for net leases.
Got it.
If we talk truck parking and throw that in there, that could fluctuate. It could be, we can talk about 15, 20%, depending on how much space you have, the location that you're at, the market, of course. That is what can really juice the actual returns. But again, there's different factors depending on the tenant who's in the net lease tenant who's in the building. Do they operate trucks? Do they need that space? Or do they have piping stored inside of a 10,000 square foot building? They maybe need space for a handful of trucks for their fleet, and then the rest is just extra space. Then I'm going to use that space. So I'm going to lease out just the warehouse, the parking they need. The rest, we're going to go and we're going to pack that full of truckers, if possible. I think we have a question Down there, absolutely. Let's shoot back. Can we, Billy, can you jump back on to the projections for Green Street for iOS? So Green Street projects for risk-adjusted returns for iOS at 8%. Industrial as a whole, they look at it at 7.2%. And then as well as mixed or accumulated commercial, I think it was at 6.9% if memory serves me correctly. And we'll pull that up again so you can see that. And if you want to take a picture and Google that, you can pull up the entire story from Green Street off their website as well. So the source, Green Street Industrial Outdoor Storage, a beautiful ugly duckling. And there's a plethora of different, and you're going to see different returns, projections all over the place. I like to go conservative as possible. So that's what I feel comfortable going with as it stands.
Is this because I compare this a lot with my self-storage, and one of my self-storages has 3 offices in the front, 6 warehouse at the back of the offices, and then 106 units. So it's able to diversify the income by the office is leased, right? Net lease, and then you have the warehouse is leased by the offices, and then a few of them by random individual. And then you have the self-storages, right? Even when the self-storage is not full, you have that, and then there's parking too. Some people are like, can I just park there, $50? So, and also the same thing, you have to go through, make sure there's good security, there's camera, gate, and things like that. So the return actually, in terms of cash on cash for self-storage, I don't know about the average, but what we're seeing is close to more like higher than multifamily, right? So it would be close to that 8, 9, or 10.
Yep.
So the question now is, I understand the cash on cash because that's what I think they're talking about here. Yep. So what about the average return? So, because that's what many of the investors want to know, like in the 5 years. I know you can't really guarantee anything, but I just wanted to know, because what we're always looking at is we try to diversify. At the same time, I'm not going to move into something that's going to underperform what I'm already doing. What are you saying? What the one that you advise on, or the one that you're doing?
I didn't catch that last part of the question. I want to make sure we're clear on that.
So what is the average return, like final average return? So right now, yes, you can get 8% average every year, but when you sell or exit, so what is the average you're looking at?
So I would say a safe number is 15%. For my B Street property, we brought that as a rule of thumb. So we brought that for $2.4 million in June of 2022. All right. Last offer we got was from Triton. We got the truck parking when they undercut us. So that one's for $3.8 million. And that was earlier this year. But before interest rates started really to shoot up, we had an offer for $4.1 million. All right. And that was at the beginning of 24. So for capital win, we were looking at a purchase price of sell price of 4.1 million. I'm damn near gonna triple my money. Just put it to you that way. And that's just off us owning truck parking. And that's not even off the numbers. That's just off the site itself. All right. So because we brought it under market. And that's the whole point of going direct to seller, because if we wait for it while it's on market, the juice is probably going to be squeezed out of it by the time we get to it. And then we're going to be in the bidding war with folks who got a lot deeper pockets than us. So that's where we come into play, where we have to be nimble to get that value and to get that real sexy return that we want. We have to be nimble. We have to go off market, and we need to be able to find those creative options like you're talking about, Adebayo, with your site. That's something that's fairly normal that I see. You see a lot of hodgepodge, different types of tenant bases mixed into one site. And that's what I want. That's what I really like, because if I can underwrite for the minimum of 2 tenants and then the rest is extra and we're paying our investors, that's a beautiful thing. So that's what we're looking for, those types of situations. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but so basically what you're saying, that's not 15% then. That's more like, if you're 3x, even so you're looking at more, almost 40, 30 to 40 or something.
But I can't count that until I sell. So I realize that's unrealized. That's unrealized. So it's really just, that's where we're at with the market right now.
So you're talking about cash on cash of 15%.
Yeah.
Currently.
Yeah.
Okay. So many of these product, right? Sometimes you have to trade off the cash on cash for the equity. In some of these asset classes, especially self-storage, you get a high cash on cash, especially when we used to buy for cap rate of 12, the good old days, So you buy something like that, they're very cash flowing. You get like 12%, 10% cash on cash. But when you sell, it will end up being average 20% still, because there's not a lot of value add, that you can really do. So even though you're increasing your income by how much truckers are coming in there, it's not really value add.
Yeah.
So even though the numbers look great, but it's not really guaranteed in a way, like the other short-term tenants. So the selling price is still going to be based on the lease that are stable and the land.
I was actually going to piggyback off that question. I wanted you to see if you can go back and describe more of your business plan, particularly the part where you were talking about the value add. I think I understand it a little more clear now that you just explained. It's really on the buy that you're really actually creating that value because you're finding them discounted.
Yep.
But I think you did describe some type of value add on top of that. Could you go through that business plan a little bit more? Where can you add value to a property like this other than just buying it at a nice, attractive discount?
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends on the site, of course. And I always say that it depends on the site. So if you're looking at a site that is, let's say, 30 years old, it can be improved. We're talking about coming through, we need to put a tenant in there, or we have a tenant that's moving out soon. There's some TI that we can do, improve the site or the building that way. Great. We're going in, making the site more, let's say we can put improve fencing, we can improve lighting, we can improve things that a company will come in and pay an increased market or increased rate for, because that site has what they need to operate their business or operate it safely or efficiently or whatever the case may be. An electronic gate, we put a $20,000 gate on the site that I own. There's things of that nature that make folks feel more comfortable paying that higher lease rate, which is in turn going to make that, especially if it's a great lease and hopefully a net lease, is going to make that site more profitable, and especially if it's a credit tenant as well. That we have somebody who wants to come along and buy it, whatever private equity group you insert into the mix, they're going to feel very comfortable. And I know this I talk to these folks a lot, and they're going to be very comfortable purchasing a site with strong lease, strong tenant, strong fundamentals, strong everything with the characteristics of the property. So a quick note on that. When we talk about the actual private equity firms, the REITs, talking to these folks regularly, like Green Court Partners, I have a relationship with them in Chicago. They're always looking for deals, okay? So I've had many calls with these folks, and they tell me what they want. I've talked to Curry Hall, who's the president of Green Court's truck parking division, truck storage management, and they tell us specifically what they want and what they don't want. That's why I built my criteria off of Altera Property Group, Green Court, all the folks who I'm looking at as potential buyers for anything that I aggregate. I need to know exactly what they're willing to buy so we can go ahead and package that properly. So we need to make it look and operate. It needs to be good for tenants, but it needs to be good for the buyer as well, where they feel comfortable with this is going to be a stable and steady return for years to come. So whether that means fencing is good, the gravel is laid out properly, things of that nature, that's the type of things I'm looking at to stabilize property. And of course, the lease is long term. That's what we're looking at in order to get that particular buyer and tenant type to make a great transaction.
Okay. Yep. That helps clarify. So there is like a forced appreciation component too. Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. One of the things that we've discussed as a team is finding that type of tenant who may have a fleet. So if you have a fleet, and then we also have a warehouse or we'll call it mechanic shop there. That way they can take care of their own vehicles themselves right there on site. So those are some of the value adds, if you will, that we all are looking to do with our facilities.
Makes sense.
I heard you mention private equity. What other exit strategies do you guys have in play?
So honestly, there's a couple different ways we can roll with it. This is going to be our first site that we're buying together as a group. I always look at it like this: hedge my bets, buy for the long term. And if I need to hold it, something that's going to be, favorable lending terms. This is why we have a great lending partner that we found. But also, so in case the economy goes south, we can hold it for the long term, weather the storm. But ultimately, we're looking to package everything up and sell for a higher multiple. So we need volume to do that. I'm talking to the bigger names that I mentioned before. That's what they want. They want something that's going to wet their whistle. They need larger transactions, or they need a large group of smaller transactions to bring to the investors, because that pressure that they're dealing with on the other side. So you're talking to somebody who has a fund or what that's $500 million that they have to deploy that capital. That's a lot of money they have to deploy, and that's a lot of return that they need to be able to push back. They need to buy in bulk or volume to get that yield. So that's what I'm looking at. That's never going to change. That's been an age-old problem that every fund manager has had. So I just need to be able to package that up and do the same thing. Does that answer your question? And if we can't, we still own real estate infill that we brought properly that can be converted to multifamily, that can be converted to whatever. So we look at things like my partner Ron and I, we're looking at our Beach Street site, which we like a lot. We're looking at it like, okay, let's say we don't sell. Let's say we partner with a developer. We bring the land. We got plenty of equity in the land as well. They bring the know-how. We can develop something in something different because we have the location. At the end of the day, that's how I got into real estate. I know I can bring the deal. That's my way in. So if I have the land or rather property that's desirable, I'm always going to have a suitor somewhere around in that environment to get me where I need to go, if that makes sense.
And just as Mike had mentioned, the one site that they have there in Fort Worth, there was another person that came in, another group that came in and built, what was it, a 100,000 square foot warehouse? So,
Yeah.
again, as long as it's zoned industrial, there's always people out there. And if it's in the right area, and like you said, the places that we're looking to buy are going to be right there along the expressway, highway, interstate. So there's going to always be some people out there looking for property that's already properly zoned.
So the major revenue source for this is the parking, but I also heard about the warehouse. What is the amount of revenue coming in from the warehouse in this deal? Oh, your project.
I think it's backward. I think they're saying the majority of the revenues coming from the net leases.
For the incoming one, in its prior project, it does have mostly trucking. Yeah, but let's.
Okay, I see.
Right.
Are you talking about the one I own? So yeah, the site I own that's on B Street, 100% right now. We have fully truck parking. We have a hotbed of truck parking. We turned over management to a company out of Miami who handles all our inbound calls. So I don't have to pick up the phone anymore, which I'm very happy about. But we do have our small warehouse listed for lease right now. And again, like I was mentioning before, we have the capability, or we have options that if we need to bifurcate that 5.5 acres to maybe say 3.5 or in 2 acres with the building, if need be. We have options to do that. But right now, we're chugging along just fine with truck parking. And we were at 100%, but we're at 95%. We got some turnover. But yeah, we're doing pretty good with that. And that's just off signage. I was doing advertising when we first brought the site because it was at about 60% occupancy. But Facebook advertisements, I was on Craigslist, I was everywhere. And it worked, and we got folks in. But the thing that really got us over the hump was the signage on the side of the road, big banner on the side of the road where truckers are driving by. They're that type of people. They're the billboard sign on the side of the road type of folks who are going to call you, say, "Hey, I just drove by and saw the sign. How much are you charging for a spot?" That's who we're dealing with that. But that's also who we're trying to move away from, because I'm looking at what my competitors and what the folks who I'm looking to sell property to are doing. They don't want to deal as much with truckers unless you're like a Green Corps who building a whole truck parking platform. They got the money to do that. We're looking at getting net tenants. And then, yeah, we'll have some truckers on the side as well to help boost up the cash flow. Does that make sense? That's your question.
I'm going to piggyback on that.
Hold on. I see Milko. He came on camera off mute for a while. You want to jump in?
Yeah, I was gonna ask what type of cap rate compressions are you guys seeing on triple net lease versus truck parking sites and selling as a portfolio versus individual?
So I'll be honest with you, Milko. I haven't seen much of anything lately because the larger transactions haven't really happened. With the interest rate environment and the things the way they were, there was like a big standstill in a lot of transactions. So you see the onesie twosies here and there, but I can't intelligently speak to you to that question because I just hadn't seen enough data over the last year because of everything. Now we're starting to come back down. Folks are getting excited. Hopefully, we see a lot more transactions happening in this interest rate environment. But that's why I'm looking at off market and purchasing deals off market just to build up on that. But all I know is I'm talking to more and more private equity firms.
Mhm.
Letting them know I'm out there, letting them know I'm looking. They're always looking for deals. They're looking to pay, but they want to pay me for deals. They don't want to. They don't want to cut me in on, let's say, equity. So I'm hearing everything they need, but I'm not seeing the numbers per se or the volume. But here's a resource I'm going to put in the chat. If you want to do monitor what I monitor, it's called iOS List. Let's see here, iOS List. If you Google iOS List, they have some great resources. There's a broker out of North Carolina who essentially he aggregated everything and got all the different iOS investors in the one room. And now he sends out a daily email list of different deals, different transactions happening, things like that. So you can see what's going on or the problems people are having, things of that nature. So it's a lot happening nationwide. And just go from there. So it's going to be different from area to area. Things in LA, you can see a 1 acre site sell for what I probably brought my site for in Dallas. You're going to see different. It's going to matter between the markets you go to.
How,
Does that
how do
answer
you
your question?
deal? Yeah, that answers it. How do you deal with, especially being in Dallas, with zoning and depending on where you're at, and special use permits for truck parking? Because it's challenging to zone these sites. So
and
curious.
to that point, we don't deal with it. We look for sites that are already zoned, have all the full entitlements, because trying to go around and get something across the finish line is it's impossible. I say it's impossible because I'm not going to spend that amount of money and amount of headache to try to get something across the finish line or approved via the city because I promise you, at every zoning committee meeting and every city council meeting, there's a group of folks who are there who live near those sites their answer is going to be no, no matter what you say and no matter what you do. And more than likely, their politicians are going to listen to them, rightfully so. And so it's very hard to get anything else across the finish line that's not already zoned and already has the proper entitlements. That's why we're looking at existing sites, never for anything development. If it doesn't have the proper zoning, the proper entitlements, the proper anything, I'm going to the next site. I'm not even going to waste my time. There's plenty of meat on the bone in a $200 billion fragmented market. I'm just going to keep moving.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yep. Very
Yeah, Chris
Chris.
Fachi here. I was late, sorry about that, and I'm trying to catch up based on the conversation. So I got two questions, one of which I already asked. Do you have a kind of a flyer and or a kind of a handout that kind of summarizes the bulk of the conversation? And then two, from what I gathered, and I might be wrong, it looks like you guys have a proposal for potential investors. While I wait to get that details, when I listen to the recording of this conversation and so on and so forth, may I ask what may be the minimum amount of investment that you are looking at, if he hasn't been answered already?
Great question, Chris. So the purpose of this presentation is to educate everyone on iOS. We don't have a particular site right now that we have sites we're looking at, we have sites we're talking about, but we don't have anything that we're ready to act on at this time. I'm going to turn it over to Cedric to expand on that a little bit more, but yeah, that's my department to produce. So I'm working that right now off market as well as Billy for on market things, but more to follow in the short term.
I'm actually going to interrupt a little bit. Yeah, so Billy, Mary, and him were talking for a little bit. We had a small unit, 800K we were going to do by ourselves. We just didn't go through. So, and then later on, I got George involved, and then I talked to Mike and Cedric, and then we're like, you know what? This is something that's educational, because I was, even as much experience that I felt that I have, it was just almost like a new field. It's similar to many things I do, but it's completely different. And I'm like, so that's why we brought them in. So mainly educational. Yes, I do believe something will come up because now we're involved with them. We're constantly looking and underwriting deals with them eventually, but nothing currently.
Yeah.
And if I can interrupt Adebayo, and while you're talking, Cedric, I'm just going to pull up this. I'm going to share my screen and show the current site that I own, and so you can see the growth that happened recently. It's starting to show now on the actual on Google Maps.
I'll just add to that. We did, when we were talking with Adebayo and George, we were actually submitting a LOI for a specific site, and the seller decided to go with someone else. So we were hoping to be able to come to you guys tonight and basically be able to speak to what our plans were for that particular site. But unfortunately, the seller has, decided to go with someone else. But just as Adebayo said, we're definitely out here in the marketplace looking for facilities in the Arkansas market, primarily that central Arkansas location area.
Yeah. And then to that point, I don't know if y'all, you should be able to see my screen, but this is the very large warehouse that they built right behind and this is our site here. Class A warehouse they built that's already been tenanted. It's finally shown on Google Maps. But yeah, and this is our site here, full of trucks here. And we also have the dumpster rental company I mentioned earlier in the corner. They put all their dumpsters, but pretty straightforward. And again, to the point, we always buy in industrial clusters. That's extremely important to me. I stick to fundamentals. That's gonna help you out regardless. And also, just a quick point. I know someone asked about the truckers and whatnot. A lot of the truckers live in these neighborhoods over here, and so some of the houses here, and also across from the actual by the 820 interstate as well. So just a couple notes there, so you understand how truckers think. They look for convenience when they're moving, especially when they're moving those large vehicles like that. And it looks like we have one message in the chat.
Yep.
You guys got a compliment, a shout out.
Yeah. I
So,
know. We're
one
gonna
final question. Do you guys provide, apart from parking, do you guys provide maybe build like bathrooms and toilet for drivers near that parking lot?
That's a great question. So a little bit about my background, right? The way I learn things is I reach out to people who are doing it, and then I figure out what they're doing. I bring things to help them. So there's a gentleman that I met out of Miami. His name was Evan Seiden. And Evan, he took I think it was an old dumpster site or something. It was something large and it was about 13 acres. This is 2 years ago. So I reached out to Evan. I saw a story. He ended up taking that site and converting it. It was already zoned industrial, but he was able to convert it to truck parking. Okay, so he can convert the whole thing to truck parking. And also he built showers. He built bathrooms that the truckers, and he charges the truckers for the showers and whatnot. And he also built I think it was a small convenience store as well. So there is precedence for things like that. It just depends on the type of operation you're running. And he was able to sell that at a very nice multiple to I forgot what group he sold it to, but it's in Miami right off the I-95. But so I was able to talk to him and get in kind of the inner workings of what he thinks about stuff like that, and also try to work some deals with him as well. But it's a mixed bag of things. So it's really find out what you want to do and what sector of iOS, because there's subsections to it as well. And if you want to do truck parking solely, go for it. But it's going to be very labor intensive and very management intensive. If you want to I'm pushing towards net lease with maybe some truckers if you have the space. I'm all about that. And then there's other ways to do it as well. So again, it just really depends on the deal. Does that answer your question?
So I'm going to close because it's been 1.5 hours.
Oh, wow.
And I actually do appreciate that we still have a lot of people that hang around. So this means that you guys are able to hold people's attention. So that shows that you guys are awesome, Mike, Billy, and Cedric. Thank you guys for coming, and respect for everybody's time. I'm sure we're going to do another session, maybe before the end of the year. And obviously, if there's any deal in the future then we'll do another session. So I think it's a very good session, and I learned a lot myself because continuously learning every day. So yeah.
Maybe we can leave some contact information for any of these gentlemen. If there are burning questions, you guys can throw it, your emails or IG handles or social media handles in the chat.
I think Cedric posted one, so you can put Lily and Mike.
Absolutely. To Mr. Orgy's point, I know he asked about any type of compressed material. I can put together fairly easily an ebook with some of the slides that we talked about. And I sent you Adebayo. I'm pretty sure you guys saw the truck parking one I did, but I'll put together one for iOS in general. It's been on my list of things to do, and I'll get it sent out to Adebayo and George so you can distribute to your constituents as you see fit. But definitely it's in the works, Mr. Chris.
Actually, this slide might just be good also.
Okay, cool.
The slide itself. And then there's going to be recording. There's video recording. And then people can watch the recording. Okay. Well,
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone. Anything, George?
No, thank you, gentlemen. Very enlightening conversation. So I appreciate you guys.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys having us on.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you guys.
Bye,
Appreciate you
everyone.
guys.
Thank you.
All right, take
See
care.
y'all.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Have a good one.
Have a good one.